from the Miami Herald, quoting officials from the National Security Agency, confirming that essentially conversations between Muhammad Atta, who was obviously the chief 9/11 hijacker, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was, he's been described as the kind of 9/11 mastermind. Their conversations between them occurred, and these were monitored by the National Security Agency while Muhammad Atta was in the United States. And the most interesting is here that, the Herald points out that the NSA is prohibited by law from monitoring calls to and from the United States without special court orders. So this was approved. And yet this is something that has been denied, it hasn't been looked into. And the worrying thing, I have a report from the London Independent, officials say that Mr. Mohammed, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was in Pakistan at the time, received a telephone call from Muhammad Atta, the hijackers' ringleader, on 10th September. Intelligence officials who monitored and then translated that conversation believed that using coded language, Mr. Mohammed gave Mr. Atta the final approval to launch the strikes. And the question, of course, needs to be asked is that what else remains of these conversations that were intercepted, how much information was available, and why was this not acted on and circulated in the intelligence community appropriately, and why hasn't the Commission, first and foremost, dealt with this issue? In conclusion, I will summarize this kind of brief presentation.
Extremely briefly, like in 2 seconds.
They were clearly not Islamic extremists. It's difficult to see how this fact fits with the conventional assumption that they were devout members of Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Furthermore, and alternatively, it's difficult to see how, even if they were members of Al-Qaeda, how the conventional depiction of Al-Qaeda as a network of devout militant Islamic extremists can be maintained given this distinctively un-Islamic conduct. The question then arises, as to who these people were, and alternatively, what was the nature of this apparent Al-Qaeda cell? The official narrative as it stands cannot resolve this problem. It's exacerbated in light of the fact that the majority of the 9/11 hijackers repeatedly entered and re-entered the United States on fraudulent visas, apparently supplied by the US consulate in Jeddah, which reportedly has a CIA connection. Worse still, many of these hijackers, while in the United States, somehow managed to obtain high-level security clearance to train at several US military installations. They had simultaneous connections with the US military while they were connected to Al-Qaeda, and I will leave it at that. This is a fundamental anomaly. It strikes at the core of the official narrative. I don't know what the explanation is, I won't pretend to, but we need to have some kind of investigation to resolve this.
We're lenient with Mr. Ahmed because he has come such a long, long way. But I do want to just mention to you these 2 books. The War on Truth by Nafis Ahmed and The Terror Timeline by Paul Thompson. I highly recommend these 2 books to all of the people who are listening in our audience. Now, from time to time, you will hear bells ringing and buzzers going off and me popping up and darting out. It's because we have votes going on in the Capitol, and I have a limited amount of time in order to get over there. So I will be going in and out, as I'm about to do now, because they just called a vote. But this will go on, and we will get back on schedule.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Representative McKinney. As Representative McKinney said, we will get back on schedule after lunch, but in the interest of time, we're going to combine the next 2 panels. So I'd like to, at this point, invite John Newman and Marilyn Rosenthal to join us at the panelist table. And John Judge, who is a veritable wealth of information, we're going to invite him to integrate his comments into the question and answer period. So if you all panelists can stay put, and we'll invite the other 2 panelists to join you. We'd like to get an initial statement from each of you, and then we'll go to the question and answer period for all of our panelists. So we can begin with John Newman. John Newman, bear with me. spent 21 years in Army intelligence and served as assistant to the director of the National Security Agency. He also served as an attaché in China. He is a history professor at the University of Maryland and has been teaching courses in counterterrorism for 10 years. Newman has written and published widely and is working on a manuscript about the events leading up to 9/11. John?
Okay, you can now? All right. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here today and to make my small contribution. It falls to me this morning to bring to your attention the story of Saeed Sheikh, whose full name is Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, and his astonishing rise to power in Al-Qaeda and his crucial role in 9/11 was completely, utterly missing from the 9/11 Commission report. And also to deal with what U.S. intelligence knew about his links to the ISI, Pakistani intelligence, and what, if anything, was said or not said in the Commission report about these things. This 20-year, I'd also like to acknowledge Paul Thompson's timeline, without which I wouldn't have been able to do very much, at least get started. So let me just put that out there on the table. This 28-year-old British national of Pakistani extraction left his prestigious London School of Economics in 1993 to hook up with Pakistani terrorists in Bosnia. After that, he took up jihad and trained in the terror camps in Afghanistan. In 1994, he tried to spring a terrorist leader from a jail in India by luring an American and 3 Britons to locations where they were kidnapped, but the plot failed, and he ended up in jail instead. The hostages were rescued. Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, paid for his lawyer, but he was never tried during his 5 years of incarceration. In 1995, 5 hostages, including an American, were killed in an attempt to spring Saeed Sheikh from jail. An Indian citizen was murdered in 1999 when Al-Qaeda and the ISI succeeded in freeing Saeed Sheikh by hijacking Indian Airlines Flight 814. Bin Laden immediately appointed Saeed Sheikh as a member of the Majlis al-Shura, the elite political council of Al-Qaeda, and referred to Sheikh as his special son. No attempt was made to arrest him when he returned to Pakistan. The ISI gave him a home and protection from the police. He lived openly and frequented swanky parties attended by senior government officials. U.S. government sources told Newsweek he was a protected asset of the ISI. During his imprisonment, there was no indictment and no trial in India. There were no indictments in Britain or the United States either. Despite his kidnapping of British citizens, he was allowed to immediately travel to London. Go figure. On January 2nd, 2000, the British Foreign Office spokesman only say that this was so because he was a British citizen and had not been convicted of any offenses overseas. There was no conviction because there had been no trial. And Britain could have indicted and tried Saeed Sheikh if they'd wanted to. The fact is they didn't want to. They waited until after a September 2002 conviction for the murder of Daniel Pearl, for whom most Americans know about this man, to ask questions of the Indian government about him in connection with that first kidnapping. The British press called this long delay a mystery, but the outraged families of Sheikh's victims condemned it and called their government's decision a disgrace and a signal to others to do the same. The Americans did not act either. Even though he had kidnapped an American citizen in 94 and another American had died in the attempt to break him out in 95. These events led to no indictment in 1994, no indictment in 95, and there was no indictment after the hijacking of Flight 814 in 1999. The United States would wait until after the 9/11 attacks to take action, sealing an indictment of Saeed Sheikh for the 1994 kidnapping in November 2001. The question is why? Did the United States not indict Saeed Sheikh because he was a British informant? While the CIA itself claims that it failed to penetrate Al-Qaeda's leadership, the agency has acknowledged on Capitol Hill in various forums that there were numerous sources being handled by foreign intelligence services. Did the agency receive information provided by Saeed Sheikh from British or Pakistani intelligence? This would help explain why Saeed Sheikh was not indicted and escaped justice for his crimes and traveled freely around England. If this is correct, then if Saeed Sheikh had been arrested, the best penetration of the Al-Qaeda leadership would have been lost. Al-Qaeda had learned in the early 1990s from the Ali Muhammad case, many of you probably know about, I can't take the time to go into, that the benefits far outweighed the risks of becoming an informant for a Western intelligence agency. And I was interested in your presentation there and where you were going with the whole visa thing in Jeddah for that same reason. If the foregoing analysis has any merit, Western intelligence agencies were receiving reports from a senior Al-Qaeda source. Once again, however, Al-Qaeda had used Western intelligence to accomplish its own mission. Saeed Sheikh was probably a triple agent. According to Pakistani police reports, for 2 years after his release, Saeed Sheikh traveled regularly to training camps in Afghanistan where he trained recruits for al-Qaeda. According to British police reports, he trained the 9/11 terrorists in hijacking techniques. Saeed Sheikh turned al-Qaeda, well, by the way, he reported directly to Abu Zubaydah, al-Qaeda's chief of external operations. He turned al-Qaeda into the more capable and operationally secure organization that it was on the morning of 9/11. Saeed Sheikh, the man about whom the commission report utters not one word, overhauled al-Qaeda's logistics, communications, and financial networks and was given responsibilities in international liaisons, such as relations with the Hezbollah or the Sudanese National Islamic Front. To facilitate financial and communications needs, he designed a new secure encrypted web-based communication system for al-Qaeda. There was talk he would one day succeed bin Laden. Over and above all these responsibilities, Saeed Sheikh had another extremely sensitive job for al-Qaeda. He was the group's principal liaison with the ISI, working with various and current former officers of Pakistani intelligence, including Lieutenant General Muhammad Aziz Khan, who after Pervez Musharraf himself was the most powerful army commander in Pakistan. Saeed Sheikh played a vital role in the 9/11 plot by financing the hijackers. For his trouble, he received the same personal budget as the two other key coordinators, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shib. As the 9/11 attacks neared, the ISI chief, General Ahmed, became more deeply mired in the plot, apparently to secure new sources of funds for the airline tickets needed for the reconnaissance flights and the flights on the date of the attack. In early August, Saeed's former prison mates kidnapped a wealthy shoe tycoon in India and held him for 15 days. The chief gangster, Mr. Ansari, ran the kidnapping operation right from Dubai, United Arab Emirates, right where Saeed Sheikh was carrying out his 9/11 paymaster duties. The kidnappers freed their hostage for $830,000 and gave $100,000 to Saeed Sheikh. In an email discovered afterwards, Ansari said, "I've paid $100,000 to Sheikh." On the orders of the ISI chief, General Ahmed, Saeed Sheikh then wired the money to the hijacker leader, Muhammad Atta. Flush with cash, Atta, Hamzi, and Hanjour each flew first class on the type of aircraft they would use on 9/11. Now I'll turn to the commission report and what U.S. intelligence did with this in the hours and days right after the 9/11 attacks. In the appendix of names at the back of the 9/11 commission report, there is a Sheikh Saeed al-Marsi listed as an Egyptian and finance chief of al-Qaeda. Al-Marsi is simply a common code name used by many al-Qaeda operatives, and of course, Sheikh Saeed is a transposition of the name Saeed Sheikh, about whom the report says nothing. In Chapter 2, which describes the al-Qaeda leadership in detail from 1988 to 1998, there is no mention of this Sheikh Saeed al-Marsi, the alleged Egyptian finance chief of al-Qaeda. Chapters 5 and 6 pick up the history of al-Qaeda again, as plans were honed for a major attack on the U.S. mainland, but despite the many, many names mentioned and discussed, nowhere was this reputed finance chief Sheikh Saeed mentioned. Besides the entry in the index of names, this Sheikh Saeed is mentioned only one time in the 9/11 final report. He pops up out of nowhere just 6 weeks before the attack and is identified only as al-Qaeda's finance chief and is said to have been in a handful of senior al-Qaeda leaders who opposed the attack. He's never mentioned again, probably because he's a ghost of our Saeed Sheikh. The 9/11 Commission, which studied U.S. intelligence and law enforcement community performance in great detail, maybe not so much great detail, but they did, neglected to cover the community's performance during the weeks following the attacks to determine who was responsible for them. Not a word about that in the report. The report does discuss the immediate U.S. responses, but the immediate investigation is never addressed. And anyone who has closely studied the post-9/11 investigation knows that the first breakthrough came 2 weeks into the investigation when the money transfers from the United Arab Emirates to the hijackers were uncovered. Furthermore, if you have studied that investigation, you know there is no disputing that while investigators may have struggled with the identity of the paymaster, they were clear about one thing. He was al-Qaeda's finance chief. For this reason alone, you have to ask why the 9/11 Commission report never mentions the finance chief's role in the 9/11 paymaster, as the 9/11 paymaster. The 9/11 Commission staff was not brain dead. They likely left this out because of the sensitivity of Saeed Sheikh's story. The investigators learned that most of the late money transfers in the 9/11 operation were linked to an alias that Saeed Sheikh had used, Mustafa Ahmed al-Hassawi. But U.S. investigators did not yet know this was his alias. So the game to find out who Hassawi was afoot, and the first person they suspected was announced on September 24th. We'll call him Mustafa number 1, Mustafa Ahmad. On September 28th, a senior government official told the press that the U.S. is seeking this Egyptian-born terrorist named Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed, whose past had included money transfers to bin Laden. 3 days later, they dropped him from the investigation. We found out why on October 1st, when U.S. investigators announced that they had found the smoking gun, and there's a nice place on the website, the timeline, if you'd like to look for more here. They found the smoking gun linking bin Laden to the 9/11 attacks. The FBI told many media outlets the 9/11 paymaster was Sheikh Saeed, an Egyptian, also known as Mustafa Muhammad Ahmed. We'll call him Mustafa number 2. And that he was also known as Sheikh Saeed. The FBI said it was he who had transferred the money to Muhammad Atta in the days leading up to the attack, and that he was a senior financial manager for bin Laden and had been in that capacity since his days in the Sudan. This is exactly what the United States needed to make an ironclad case proving bin Laden's guilt. So they were very pleased with themselves, and they announced that they had found the smoking gun linking bin Laden to the attacks. They had indeed found the smoking gun, but had no idea of the bombshell they would uncover 1 week later. Then Mustafa Muhammad Ahmad, like Mustafa Mahmoud Saeed Ahmed before him, were dropped as the Dubai paymaster, and the 9/11 Commission does not mention either of those names in the extensive list of those connected to the plot. At the end of the first week of October, an FBI team investigating the 9/11 attacks made a startling breakthrough. The first details emerged in CNN's coverage. The investigation now identified Mustafa Ahmed al-Hassawi as our Saeed Sheikh, the man released from prison in India less than 2 years ago after hijackers of an Indian Airlines flight demanded his freedom. The sources for this CNN story were said to be senior-level U.S. government sources and U.S. investigators. 2 days later, on October 8th, CNN followed up the story reporting, quote, Indian and U.S. authorities now see a link between the 1999 Indian Airlines Flight H-14 hijacking and the September 11th attacks in the United States. Freed was Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh, whom authorities say used the pseudonym to wire $100,000 to suspected hijacker Muhammad Atta, and who then distributed the money in the United States. But there was more. An FBI team working with cell phone numbers provided by Indian intelligence uncovered a new smoking gun. They learned that the chief of the ISI, Mahmoud Ahmed, had ordered Saeed Sheikh to send $100,000 of the kidnapping ransom to Muhammad Atta a month before the 9/11 attack. This ugly detail emerged when the FBI team ran traces on Saeed Sheikh's cell phone number. Beginning in July, the ISI chief's number was among the regular people that Saeed Sheikh communicated. On October 7th, President Musharraf sacked Ahmed for this nefarious act. This story was widely covered in the press around the world, not covered here in the United States. One piece was added on October 9th that Musharraf had done this at the behest of the U.S. authorities, which asked for his removal after they confirmed the role of the money transfer to Atta. This bombshell could not have come at a worse time. Washington and London were preparing to invade Afghanistan while securing Pakistan as an ally. It's hard to imagine a revelation more damaging than the fact that Pakistan's intelligence service and most powerful army commanders were behind the 9/11 attack and the paymaster, a known terrorist who had been able to carry out his mission because the U.S. and U.K. had set aside justice for his crimes. More than the ISI chief had been involved in Pakistan. The investigation established that there were other generals, Aziz Khan and others, and I'm going to skip over that because I'm out of time. It's now clear that these Islamist generals who had installed Musharraf in the 1999 coup were behind Saeed Sheikh. Musharraf fired them all the same day, October 7th, the day after Saeed Sheikh's links to them were discovered. That a sovereign government and supposed ally was so directly involved in the 9/11 atrocity must have stunned and deeply embarrassed the American administration. It was as politically damaging for Prime Minister Tony Blair as Pakistan's role was for Pervez Musharraf. The stakes in Pakistan were very high, as U.S. General Anthony Zinni explained to CBS 60 Minutes. Musharraf may be America's last hope in Pakistan, and if he fails, the fundamentalists would get hold of the Islamic bomb. Musharraf was also vital to the war effort and was the key to neutralizing Islamists and rounding up al-Qaeda operatives in Pakistan. The story of Saeed Sheikh and the general is only lightly covered in Western media, and only one American newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, carried it on October 10th. One wonders if this didn't put the Wall Street Journal on the ISI's radar screen. Remember the story of Daniel Pearl a few weeks later. Not a single other American outlet carried the story, and the role of Saeed Sheikh and the generals in the 9/11 attack disappeared in the American and British media. Prominent outlets, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the BBC, and the Sunday Times still carried the story that the paymaster was an Egyptian. Asian media, however, bored in on the story of Saeed Sheikh and the generals and prodded the West, asking why there was so little pressure to hand him over. And there would be no pressure to do so until after Pearl was murdered 4 months later. Pearl discovered that senior Pakistani scientists were helping bin Laden acquire nuclear know-how. For his part, Saeed Sheikh didn't seem worried about it. He returned in October to Lahore and again partied with government leaders. The American media, wholly dependent on U.S. government sources, seemed not to notice. In the middle of November, the U.S. government suddenly dropped his Egyptian identity and claimed he was a Saudi businessman. Where did that come from? From a British source, 2 oblique references to another Ahmed in a Dublin charity link to al-Qaeda. And with that, the story died. This dubious fourth version underpinned the separation of Saeed Sheikh from the astonishing story of his rise to power in al-Qaeda and the shadow of a crucial role in the 9/11 plot. But a noticeable facet of this fourth version is that the paymaster was still the CFO of al-Qaeda. The 9/11 Commission report, which carries Mustafa al-Hassawi as the paymaster and Sheikh Saeed as the al-Qaeda CFO, has dodged the issue and does not say if the two are the same or not. Thus, technically, even if the Commission staff knew the truth, they have not told a bald lie.
John?
By not addressing the issue, however, the Commission leaves the impression that both men are real, which helps to perpetuate the suppression of Saeed Sheikh's story. Saeed Sheikh from 9/11 and al-Qaeda, U.S. authorities had no intention of letting him get off scot-free. In mid-November, at the very moment he went from prominence to obscurity, the United States finally but secretly indicted Saeed Sheikh for the 1994 kidnapping of American India. The indictment will only be revealed in late February 2002.
Excuse me, John. We're going to have to ask you to wrap up very briefly.
3 sentences to go.
Okay, thank you.
One might be, the indictment would, the administration, then an administration official speaking in terms of anonymity told Agence France Presse that the Justice Department had pressed the National Security Council to have Saeed Sheikh extradited. One might be justified in asking the question, why would the National Security Council have to be pressed to extradite a murderer of U.S. citizens? By late February, the issue was moot. Pearl was murdered, and Musharraf swore he would personally hang him before turning him over to the Americans, unlike Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shib, whom he did turn over. But, of course, they had not been Western penetrations of al-Qaeda. So we've learned through the Congresswoman McKinney's office that there was a classified briefing about Saeed Sheikh. While that's comforting, the fact that the rest of the world knows about his role in 9/11 while the American public and most of Congress remains ignorant is disquieting. We can no longer say we're protecting sources and methods about a story known to the rest of this planet. We are now mocked for our ignorance about this story, and even members of Britain's Parliament poke fun at us. It's long past time to come clean about Ahmed Saeed Sheikh.
Thank you, John. And hopefully you have the complete statement available for the representative staff so that can be distributed. John, you have the complete statement available for the...
Yes, I do with the...
Okay. All right. So if there's things that you had to leave out, it will be made available. Also, I want to announce that there's going to be a DVD testimony on tape by William Pepper, the author and English barrister and an American lawyer with specialized training in international law and international human rights on this same topic. He convened a seminar on international human rights at Oxford University. That DVD will be aired right here in this room during the lunch break for those who are interested in seeing it. Our next speaker is Marilyn Rosenthal. She is the mother of Josh Rosenthal, who was killed in the attack on the South Tower of the World Trade Center on September 11. She's currently editing her book, 9/11, Searching for My Son and His Killers. Since her son's death, she has become an expert on warnings about and proceedings the 9/11 attack. She is Professor Emerita, medical sociologist, and adjunct professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Michigan Medical School. She is also an associate director of the UM Medical School's program in Society and Medicine. Welcome, Ms. Rosenthal.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my research. After my son was killed and we somewhat recovered from the trauma and the shock, my first reaction as a social scientist was to find out as much as I could from as reliable sources as I could. And one of the subjects I was interested in, along with many other members of victims' families, is what information the White House could have had available to it before 9/11. So I'd like to summarize my findings here by telling you a little bit about the 10 different sources of information the White House could have had access to, that the President could have had on his desk in helping understand what was going on in the world. There are 15 United States government intelligence agencies. We've heard a lot about the CIA and the FBI, but there's many more than that, and I want to talk about one of them after I go through the list. We also have documented the information that the White House and various intelligence agencies received from foreign intelligence agencies in a period of time leading up to 9/11. In addition to that, there are the public declarations from Osama bin Laden. There were the transition briefings from the Clinton administration officials. There was information from America's foremost terrorism experts, George Tenet and Richard Clark. There was information that came through the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. There were unusual activities in the financial markets, and there were thousands of threat warnings in the summer of 2001. Here's a list of the various intelligence, the 15 intelligence agencies that we pay our tax monies for. We're going to just quickly go through that. And I'd like to just say a few words about the National Security Agency, during this, which monitors electronic messages and telephone calls. During the summer of 2001, the National Security Agency reported at least, that's supposed to be in red there. Mike, we're moving forward. Okay, the NSA reported at least 33 communications that they had intercepted and translated, indicating a possible imminent terrorist attack in 2001. I am wondering if those 33 included the following two. Okay, on August 20th, 2001, Mohammed Atta sent a coded email message to Ramzi Ben El-Sheib, the handler for the cell here, indicating the approximate time of the attack in 3 weeks and the 4 targets. That was a coded message, and I would presume our coding experts would have been able to figure out what that said. But a little easier to figure out was a telephone message from Atta to Ramzi on August 29th, 2001, indicating the date of the attack. And the code in that was so simple that my 12-year-old granddaughter could figure it out immediately, and it was 11/9. And that's a European way of writing a date, 9/11. That information is from a book called Masterminds of Terror, which was written by 2 British journalists and is based on interviews with Ramzi and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed before they were captured in Pakistan. In addition, we can look very quickly at the foreign sources of intelligence concerning imminent attacks. All my material, by the way, is from the public sector, and any of you with persistence can find all this. In the late summer of 2001, there were specific messages from Britain, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, the governments or intelligence agencies or heads of governments, and interestingly enough, from a secret Taliban emissary from Afghanistan. I don't know what to make of that. And warning of an imminent attack. There was additional intelligence information in the decade before, and particularly the year before, from all of those intelligence agencies. Then when we turn to government reports, some of which have been mentioned here, there were 8 government reports between 1994 and the last one in 2001. The first one in 1994 was, for example, called Terrorism 2000, the future face of terrorism. And, of course, the 2001 report was the Hart-Rudman report on counterterrorism. The majority of these reports, beginning with the 1994 report, indicate possible scenarios where terrorists would hijack airplanes and crash them into American landmarks. So if the president had wished, he could have had a good deal of information from those 8 reports. Then just let's look at statements from Osama bin Laden. Okay. Between 1993 and April 2001, Osama bin Laden gave 26 televised interviews with British and American and foreign correspondents in the Middle East. And he gave 26 televised interviews or made public statements that contained threat warnings. Between December 1992 and September 9, Al-Qaeda carried out 9 bombings, assassinations, and attempted assassinations. Then, of course, I'm going to go over the material quite quickly concerning statements made by the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet. Let me just read a few of these. From 1995, quote, from 1995 to 9/11, we produced 46 papers I would call significant strategic intelligence analysis on bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic extremists. During 2000 and 2001, we pushed our analytic products, into broader circulation. The leadership of the CIA repeatedly warned the policy community in the executive branch in Congress of the seriousness of the threat, and he went on to give some specific examples. You all know about the presidential briefing, and you may have missed an interesting quote from George Tenet at 8:50 on 9/11. He was having breakfast with former Senator Boren in the Sheraton Hotel. An aide informed him that the World Trade Center had been attacked, and Tenet's response was, "This has the fingerprints of bin Laden all over it." Okay. Then, of course, there's the second renowned American terrorism expert, Richard Clarke. And these are quotes taken from his book. He talked about the difference between the Clinton administration and the Bush administration in terms of the priorities they gave to terrorism, their emphasis on terrorism. And there was also his January 25th, 2001 memo to Condoleezza Rice, which was only just released a short time ago, which contained explicit warnings. And he is quoted as saying, in the summer of 2001, the threat level exceeded anything George Tenet and I had ever seen, and it took until September 4th to get the principals committee meeting on Al-Qaeda that he had requested urgently in the January 25th memo. And I have to read aloud a statement that Richard Clarke made on 60 Minutes on March 21st, 2004, because it expresses exactly how I feel. Frankly, quote, "Frankly, I find it outrageous that the president is running for re-election on the grounds that he is doing such great things about terrorism. He ignored it for months when maybe we could have done something to stop 9/11. Maybe. We'll never know." Then there was information that was available from the FAA. Security breaches at airports have been known and documented and reported on for decades. There's nothing new in that subject area. And it's already been stated that between April and September 10th, the FAA had received 52 separate intelligence reports specifically mentioning Al-Qaeda threats to domestic airlines. They distributed 15 security flyers that included mention of Osama bin Laden hijacking and attacks in the United States. You've already heard the final quote. We also know that in the several months before 9/11, there were 30 cockpit intrusions on American commercial airlines. There's a lot to be said about that. And I see my time is running short, and I'm going to continue for a little bit more. There's been a lot of interest in activities in the financial markets. And all of you know about the unusual spikes in put orders in the options market on American and Unusual Airlines, unusual short sells on reinsurance companies that held insurance on buildings in the World Trade Center. There was also unusual purchases of Treasury notes and unusual surges in currency flow. Now, one of the staff reports, which was published sometime after the 9/11 Commission report, did go into great detail on the SEC investigation of activities in the financial markets. And the research is impressive and persuasive in terms of the activity that went on in the American market. And the evidence persuades me that it was not related to Al-Qaeda. But and that was the point that the staff made, that there's no evidence that Al-Qaeda was involved in any of the manipulations in American financial markets. However, there are questions that remain. The SEC examined 9.5 million transactions. That sounds like a lot until you calculate the number of transactions that go on in a week's period of time. So all we know is that they looked at transactions for the weeks before 9/11. So if I checked that out and included the weeks of August through September 9th, and that represents 17.6% of all the transactions. So we have to ask some questions about their methodology. Furthermore, they depended on the word of overseas sources, and they claimed they were unable to check that. They indicate difficulty in investigating offshore and shell companies. Nobody has explained why the president of the German National Bank, speaking publicly a number of times in the week after 9/11, why such a person would suggest insider trading in, quote, airline and insurance stocks and gold and oil futures. The staff reasoned that only Al-Qaeda could have been the source of such insider trading. I think we have to ask some questions about the possibility of other individuals who might have been hidden Al-Qaeda supporters or others with access to this intelligence, particularly from overseas. And, of course, we just have to ask, how are our financial markets actually protected?
Ms. Rosenthal, I think that's...
Okay, let me just show one more slide. And
okay, this is on. We have about one more minute, and then we're going to have to go to the question.
Let's go to the categories and overall distributions of the threat warnings. Okay. With some graduate students helping me, we collected from what we considered to be responsible sources as many of the threat warnings as we could find on the web, in newspapers, from reliable books. And among the thousands of threat warnings we collected, we found 144 unique threat warnings, because there's a lot of repetition of these, and we were able to categorize these in a variety of ways. And you can see from the chart what we found. It turns out that 21% of the unique warnings, 21% of the unique warnings were about terrorists hijacking planes and crashing them into buildings and American landmarks. I am willing to make an assessment. I have a number of quotes from various individuals here that you have all heard, but my final assessment is this. 9/11 could have been prevented, and move forward to this mic. Toward the end. 9/11 could have been prevented or at least contained. There was enough specificity in the pre-9/11 information to institute these security steps: harden cockpit doors and tighten airport security. Okay. And I thank you very much for indulging me.
All right. Thank you very much. And I just want to, yes, indeed. There is indeed so much information and so little time. Unfortunately, the Commission did not air this information, which is why we're holding these briefings today. I want to let everyone know that this session, this briefing is online streaming as we speak. Also, a DVD will be available of this briefing later, and an online posting will be available later at www.house.gov/McKinney. We're going to